Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Authority Podcast here on the B Podcast Network. Thanks, as always, for being with us. This is a conversation I recorded with Brian Carter about his book, The Retention Formula, and we'll get to that in just a moment. Before I start the conversation, wanted to send out a couple things your way. One is you're going to hear a couple of advertisements during this episode for our current sponsors, and I just wanted to personally ask you, please do check those out. We really do appreciate these companies that support our work here, sponsor us, and do great work to support educators, students, and schools. And so it really means a lot to us when you go visit their page. If it's something that could help you, book a demo or learn more about it. But it's really our way of course, thanking them for their support of us. And we only work with sponsors and advertisers that we believe will be valuable to you. So please do check them out. Also, if you've been a listener of our show for a while here and you're enjoying it, we truly always appreciate Apple reviews. If you have a moment to leave a 5-star rating or review on Apple Podcast, if you're an Apple Podcast user, it only takes a few minutes, or rather probably 30 seconds, but it really means a lot and makes a difference. So if you have an opportunity, thank you so much for your support in that way. Okay, let's get to this conversation with Brian Carter. Brian has more than 2 decades of experience and a master's of science. He's an accomplished keynote speaker, author, comedian, marketer, salesperson, leader, teammate. He's in fact the best-selling author of multiple books, and he regularly is booked by major speakers bureaus with satisfied clients like Microsoft, McDonald's, JP Morgan, as well as nonprofits, public sector, national and state associations, many more. Brian has a lot to say about business, and he's got an entertaining approach to it. As I mentioned, his book is called The Retention Formula: Stop the Turnover Crisis, Harmonize the Generations, and Skyrocket Profits. No matter what your organization is, if you're in a school or a district, or you're part of the industry side of things, turnover is a major challenge across the board. And so this book has a lot of value, and Brian's insights are really helpful. So pleased to bring you this conversation. And here's my conversation with Brian Carter. Brian, thanks so much for being on the show.
Thanks for having me, Ross, and saying such amazing things about me.
Yeah, well, we'll see what happens. So, Brian, what are some of the important factors that these Gen Z and Millennial generations that are in the workforce now care about besides just the money?
Yeah, well, definitely a sense of purpose, especially Gen Z, very purpose-driven folks, and some of them to the point where they have very big criticisms of our society and capitalism and all kinds of things. There's a lot more questioning of authority between both Gen Z and millennials. So everything gets questioned, just like these stereotypes will get questioned, and they are stereotypes. So when I got to work with the National Academy of Sciences, they had me come out, and we were on a work group, a team with the Bureau of Labor and the CIA and Pew Research and Deloitte. We all talked about, are these labels useful? And they're kind of as useful as any stereotype, right? Because you're going to get people saying, like, you'll get a Gen Z person saying, no, I think my generation doesn't want to work and they're lazy or high maintenance or whatever. So it's not going to apply to everybody. But what we came up with, nobody likes really to be labeled. So if what you do in practice, and we can talk here in broad strokes, here's what the generations are. And I also have a list of things that there are values that all generations agree with, where you can start as a foundation. But after we talk about all those stereotypes, we have to come back to, let's engage the person in front of us. Whether you're a leader or a teammate, you need to be curious about that person in front of you. And you might go, yeah, they seem young. Don't know if they're Gen Z or millennial. Maybe they're better at technology than me. Maybe they want more work-life balance, that kind of thing. But let me get to know that person.
There certainly is a lot of that stereotyping, and I don't know if that's a defense mechanism a lot of times to kind of explain away. Well,
I think it's a heuristic. It's a rule of thumb. Where our brains are always trying to be efficient. Sometimes that's why we do things that are lazy, right? We're always trying to be efficient, and those labels help us kind of get close to truth, even though it's not always accurate.
Right. And then when it seems unfamiliar, right? When there are these significant changes between generations and it's,
Yeah.
we're looking for an explanation or a label. And ultimately, it's a lot more complicated than that because a lot of the changes and shifts, if not most or all of them in attitudes between generations, are a response to circumstances, economic circumstances, societal circumstances, political circumstances, right?
Hmm.
Where, the economy of today, the job market, the housing market of today is not what it was 40, 50 years ago. So of course this generation is going to have a different view on what is realistic to them, what matters to them, what they have to do to achieve what they want. I also think that there's a difference in just in the definition of work and what work is, that it's not about not wanting to work, but it's about more of an interest in what is the outcomes of those work, right? And you talk about
Hmm.
purpose and values and wanting it to be meaningful, and also that less of an attitude of hard work for its own sake as a self-contained value. I want to prove that I'm a hard worker, but that there's plenty of young people, young entrepreneurs, young people in all kinds of fields who have no problem working hard if they see what
Right.
that work is doing, or if they're
Right.
building something, if they're leading to something, but that they want to really know that it's meaningful, and that I think they want to hold their organization accountable
Yeah.
for being authentic in its values, and that
Right.
those aren't just something that we say we do, but do I and then there's just a refusal to accept that's not going to be the case, to say, okay, what, I came into this workplace or this profession believing certain things, and I really was bought into that, and now that I'm here I see that they're not really living that out, and
Right.
instead of just being unhappy here, let me see what else is out there.
Yeah, transparency is critical. I mean, I've seen that as well. That the kind of leader that gets questioned is the one that kind of avoids those tough questions. You know, it just isn't transparent enough. It's certainly easy to come in. Yeah, I mean, young people tend to be idealistic. And you come in to quote the real world, which really means the world that was created by older people. And that's part of the truth. There's also some facts of life that, things that I didn't understand in my 20s that I do now. I'm just turned 50. So I think there's some things that young people do because they're in their 20s or 30s, right? And then there's some things they do that are actually generational. But yeah, it is tough because I think that we look at Gen Z specifically, they have more of a consciousness about economics and history and the whole world than the previous generations do, right? So they're thinking about what's happening in the school in that context or in the job. They're thinking about it in the context of like, how does this affect people in third world countries, right? And what are we really doing here? And can all of this be better? Can we have better values in government and work and society? Can we have better communities? That's what I hear from Gen Z people thinking about things at that level. And that's something like I'm Gen X, which is kind of a lost generation because we're kind of like the middle kids stuck between we're being called boomers, but we're not. We understand younger people to a degree. And I think more like a millennial than most Gen X people do. But we still all have to come together and work together. And I think Gen Z and millennials just want to see the older generation say, yeah, let's work on this together. Yes, the things you're talking about are real.
Yeah, and you referenced the transparency piece, right? And that's part of communication, right? And how critical communication is to communicating about decision making and about transparency. And that certainly can relate to generational differences, because there is one part of it being that younger generations that might feel less hierarchical, less, of that deference to power structures, right? And
Mm-hmm.
feeling as though they expect to be shown that they're valued by being clued into information. Part of it is just good and bad leadership practices, and
Right.
and it's about saying, well, let's be more selective about what we're deeming to be quote unquote privileged information, and understand that everybody has an opportunity to be more successful and effective when they have an understanding of our decision making, and they see that it's consistent with our goals and our values, and they feel like they're really contributing to that, no matter what their generation. But when they have more information, they're able to make smarter decisions too in their contributions. But a big part of it could be that, yeah, as leaders and managers have been in positions where they're now dealing with multiple generations, that again, there's much less tolerance for lack of transparency and
Right.
for not communicating and making clear those things.
And to your point, like we mentioned leadership, there's one of the things I go into in the book, and I always talk about in keynotes, is that there are 3 or 4 major styles of leadership. One of them, like you're talking about with boomers, it's very common, is authoritative.
Hmm.
This is do what I say. I don't have to explain myself. It's very military. And the funny thing is that not only is that not working as well now, like we've referenced, but it's also not working as well in the military either. They're like people in the military are saying, yeah, we're having to adjust as well because Gen Z is not just doing it because we said we do it. And there's another type of leadership that works better with all generations and is transformational. That's essentially saying, like, hey, we have a vision. Here's what we're going for. Let's do it together. We're going to innovate, and we're all going to grow while we're doing it, which means being able to say, I'm not perfect. I'm not done. None of us are.
Yeah, I mean, those different there's leadership styles. There is opportunities, right, through having some getting acquainted and familiarized with some of these generational trends and preferences to get smarter, to get to not just do it the way we've always done it, because
Mm.
maybe there was a better way to do it before, but because nobody was expecting that, there wasn't a lot of pressure to change it. But who knows what effect it may have had, what good ideas or inputs were missed because nobody was asked. Right? And
Yeah.
there's also, I mean, in addition to like the communication, leadership styles, communication preferences, and even barriers right around the medium, or the way, like actually the way that I deliver my message to you, whether it's technology or, I mean, how does some of that play into the need to kind of navigate organizationally and understand how different people are going to relate to different ways of communicating.
I think flexibility is really important there. Communication is a great example of, if you've got someone who only responds to phone calls and you're texting them and they're not texting you back, obviously somebody has to be more flexible. And it's good to have that as value so that more people are trying to be more adaptive to the people around them. It can become really inefficient if you got to deal with 5 different communication methods all the time.
Mm-hmm.
But if you pick 2 or 3 key ones, and that's why I'll have something like Slack or Microsoft Teams or whatever, here's our messaging platform, right? And they're like, no, I'm not going to do it on WhatsApp. Sorry. The larger the organization, the more you'll get that kind of dictate for efficiency, right? Yeah.
Yeah, totally. And yeah, there's opportunities there, right? To be flexible, but also to just understand that there can be two-way agreement on things. That,
Hmm.
that sometimes, right, operationally, logistically, for efficiency's sake, right?
Yeah.
We can't necessarily personalize, if we have hundreds of employees, have each of them say, well, I prefer WhatsApp, I prefer text,
Right.
DM me on Instagram. But to say, look, these are the tools we're using. We believe they're the best, and we can get some input on that, but ultimately we're going to make a decision. We're going to have accountability around that and have to move forward. And some of it may be, there's obviously a lot of shifts in technology that may be more unfamiliar to some of the older folks in the workplace, that maybe
Hmm.
requires, okay, let's make sure that we're having adequate training on these so that they're
Right.
not feeling uncertain or left behind. And then there's others where things evolve so quickly that what most people in the workplace use, whether it's email or even Slack now, and then Gen Z will decide that, oh, we don't use that anymore. Right? But to say,
Right.
look, we have certain productivity tools here that we need to use.
Well, my favorite story is I had a client I spoke to recently, and they were like, I just wanted to let you know we just got rid of our faxes, and I was like, okay, cool, right? Because this is technology that many organizations left behind 20 years ago, right?
Yeah.
But people at all different levels. And there are a lot of industries that are behind. Obviously, some of the most obvious ones like tech, tend to be on the cutting edge of things. But then you get into manufacturing and these other spaces where they might still have their faxes, you know.
Right. And it's in a lot of ways, there is no one size fits all, right? It's what works for them.
Right.
There's certain industries or organizations that are by nature will have to have adapted more to more remote and hybrid setups. There's others where that's not the way that their industry is going to
Right.
work. But
Or like lab work where you have to come in and
right.
use the $1 billion equipment, can't take it home.
Right. If you have to be in the building, there might be certain things that it's not worth it to force on people, because they're going to say, well, I can just go over there and talk to this person, right? So
Right.
okay, we can have other tools available, but let's not make it an emphasis, because it's not the most critical thing to them being able to do their job
Right.
successfully.
But
I
it
think
is, can
another,
I wrap up
yeah,
on that one?
sure.
Like there's a process in the book, and there's even, this book starts with a fictional story about an organization going through this kind of
Mhm.
process where there is what you're talking about, this feedback back and forth. And just like all relationships, the feeling like you're being heard is a huge part of it. Even if at the end of the process, they can't change everything, just that, like having that process where people are heard and it's truly considered, then we make
Right.
some of the changes we can make. But if you don't have that in the middle, you're like, well, I know what they're going to say and blah blah blah, and we're going to have this thing, we're just going to, this is what we're able to do, and you didn't do that process of conversation, people are not going to be as happy.
Yeah, and again, the authenticity in that being critical, right?
Mm,
Knowing that, okay, this is truly a dialogue, it's truly being considered. All these ideas, or sometimes, who knows, none of them may go into implementation, but we had a process where we know, versus we were asked for our feedback, and then the very next day they were launching something, and like clearly there was no time for them to even listen to our feedback because everything was already in place, right? And
right.
that's, I mean, again, I think people of any generation can notice that, and there's going to be individual differences in how much that's important to them or not. But it's just good management to
Hmm.
understand that. And as the generations mix and blend in the workplace, of course, some of their values are going to rub off on one another and transfer, and they're going to see different things that appeal. I think one of the things I would describe it as, that you also wrote about in the book, is Gen Z, probably specifically, although it would relate to millennials as well. It's sort of a freedom to fully be themselves.
Mm,
The fact that they have other passions and interests and things outside of their work or outside of their day job that they want to be able to pursue. And that certainly, I think, allowing them to not have to feel like they have to hide those things
right.
is going to be important to making them happy where they are, right?
Right.
That they're going to be interested in that stuff regardless. But if they feel like, well, I can't talk about that stuff when I'm here, or I have to act like I don't care,
Right.
then ultimately I'm probably not going to be super happy here.
Yeah, I think again, it's authenticity, like allowing people to be their authentic selves, even if they're authentically a jerk, but also openness, right? One of the things we
Mhm.
aren't talking about here yet is being open to other people and different ways of living and thinking and different feelings, et cetera. That's huge. But the other sort of generational trend that falls under is the boomers having thought we have to sacrifice and work hard because there's a reward at the end of the journey. But we know with changes in inflation and all these other things, there's no guarantee millennials, Gen Z, or even some boomers are going to have this amazing retirement experience. So my assumption is we want to make our life good now. It's
Uh-huh.
like if we're not living for later, we're living for now. So I want a rich, fulfilling, satisfying life now, and that's the essence of work-life balance to me.
Yeah, I and and I also, yeah, I think it relates to that idea of focusing on outcomes, right?
Mm.
And not, what we might call, particularly in sports, false hustle, right? Do you look
Yeah.
like you're working hard, or are you getting the job done, right? And that could relate to
Yeah.
things like this, where maybe I'm a person that I have a side business or an entrepreneurial thing I'm working on, or but I'm doing great work at my day job, but I
Right.
also have this other thing, and I'm able to balance them both. But is my company looking at me as, well, are you fully committed? Is this all you're paying attention to? And
Right.
and anytime I hear about anything else you're doing, do I feel like you're stealing from us, right?
Yeah,
Or
it's
am I
ridiculous.
focused on great? And because when you talk about retention, if I feel like I can do it all, like I'm doing well here, I'm happy here, I'm happy with what I do, but it goes to a certain point, and then there's other things I like to do
Yeah.
too. I'm interested in, and yeah, and specifically, I mean, I've thought about this quite a bit when it comes to the education, and the fact that there are certain restrictions, right, around money factors, around compensation budgets, and what's available. And it's, as much as we might want to advocate for policy makers, right, to allocate higher compensation for folks that work in the field, until that happens, individual school leaders, right, they only have so much to work with. And yet
Right.
there are opportunities that a lot of the educators are interested in doing different things, and it doesn't have to be an either or. A big piece in that industry in particular to the retention is leaving the profession entirely, right? It's not just
Hmm.
going to another company. It's
Right.
saying, well, I feel like I can no longer be successful or have the life I want to have if I'm in this
Yeah.
profession. And then they might stay in education, but go work for an ed tech company, or
Right.
because they feel like that's but yet there's a lot of hybrid solutions. There's a lot of educators who also work full time in a school, and have a part-time job supporting an ed tech
Hmm.
company. And it's something that allows them to stay on purpose, feel like they're doing, make a little more money, even expand their influence and do more great work. And that requires leadership that looks at that as a positive, right? And saying this is
Hmm.
a good opportunity because they get to do things they're interested in, they get to make a difference, and they also get to stay here where they're making a tremendous difference. Versus if we lose this person, that's a negative outcome.
Well, all that goes to one of the trends is, people talk about quiet quitting because, oh, you're not giving us, like, here's the job description, but you're not going above and beyond to prove that we should, move you ahead or keep you or whatever. That's this old kind of fear-based way of leading and motivating employees that it's not going to work anymore. Most people don't want to live that way or feel that kind of fear all the time and disconnection from leadership. So the burden is really on, the top leaders as well as HR people to better define, like you said, what's the outcome we want, and how do you measure it, right?
Mhm.
How are you actually, so you're supposed to do this many hours, we're measuring that, you did that, what else are we measuring? And to bring up a sore subject, sometimes we're measuring to national testing standards, which may undermine the goal that everybody has for education and transforming young people. So we need better and more comprehensive ways to measure the impact that we want from educators.
Yeah, and really from everybody. There's this concept I talk about a lot. I do high performance career coaching with people in all kinds of industries, and we talk about expectations versus agreements, and expectations being the
Mm,
one-sided, sometimes explicitly stated, sometimes not, but your company or your supervisor has certain things they just expect you to do. And and it's a lose, because either you don't do them because you're not really clear on it, and then you get reprimanded, or even if you do it, it's just taken for granted. Well, that's what we expected, right? You can't really be rewarded for it. Versus having a dialogue and a two-sided agreement and saying, look, this is what I need from you. Okay, I can do that, but to do that, I need XYZ resource. Well, I can give you these resources. All right, and then you figure out what it is, and then there's no ambiguity. If you've done what you're supposed to do, you're successful, your organization gets what they want, everybody's
right.
happy. And certainly the ability for that to lead to much better outcomes is true across anybody, but there could be very different ways that generations might react to the lack of that, right?
Yeah.
That feeling as though your organization's always in a position where they can kind of move the goalposts on you or change things or say,
Hmm.
well, you didn't do exactly what we thought, or you don't have clarity on, okay, if I want to move up to the next role or get a bonus or
Yeah.
whatever the thing is that you're working toward. Okay, well, what do I need to do in order to achieve that?
Right.
Let's talk about what that looks like so that I either do it or I don't. If I didn't achieve it, I don't need you to tell me because I will know. And that's better for everybody, right? Because you're going to
Right.
get much better results as an organization because people know what they're working on. And it's much better for them because they have focus and they're not guessing and getting
Right.
caught off guard.
These are all super healthy things, and it's like clarity and boundaries and agreements like you're talking about. What comes to mind for me is the fact that from my generation, but definitely millennials on down, there's a lot more understanding of what a healthy psychology is and what's dysfunctional. And that's the problem, is that we've had leaders in the past who, they're just really part of a dysfunctional pattern that they had with people. And so this, like, you're disappointing me thing comes out. It's motivated people around them in the past. It's worked for them. It doesn't mean it's healthy. So yeah, it's just an interesting journey to try to get everybody to understand a little bit better. In a way, to have a healthy organization, all the people in it have to become healthier psychologically too, especially at the top.
Right. Yeah, it's very hard to operate in an environment where you don't know when there's not a clear correlation between what you do and what happens next, right?
Right.
I think that relates a lot. I've written
It's
some,
gotten, yeah,
yeah.
go ahead. Sorry.
I've just written some articles about what I call the three cons of leadership, but about this consistency and constancy, right? And I think
Mm,
like that the constancy in particular relates to this, where it's like having a leadership that's steadfast, like they're clear in their vision, they communicate it, and each day you kind of know you're getting the same thing versus
mhm.
the other case where you just don't know what's going to happen. And then
Right.
we can make a
Right.
mistake one day and they say, oh, that's no big deal. And the next day we make the same exact mistake and we're getting a pink slip. Or you have to
Mm,
really know, in order to try, in order to take risks, in order to do new things, in order to do anything that's innovative, right? You need
yeah.
to know that, okay, like I'm working in an environment and plenty of other things, right? Taking personal risks. You mentioned mental health days and
Mm,
just the other things that can be so critical to saying, look, I have this thing that's going on and I need to be able to express it because that's the only way I'm going to be able to get support for
right.
it, whatever that may be. And I need to know that there's a structure in place where I have a way to do that and that I'm going to get the outcome out of it that I want versus
Yeah.
being blindsided.
It's tough, because I know from one side, allowing that stuff to happen in a workplace seems like a lot of, they're giving a lot and they're potentially losing things like productivity or whatever it is. But I think overall, for all of us in society, it's a healthier way to go, because we don't all the way we don't know, if you don't have that, somebody goes off and commits suicide, somebody goes home and gets deeper into alcoholism because they don't have support, right? And so, although there's been always been such a strong distinction between work and personal, and that's definitely melding and opening up, but how to balance it, I think, is the issue. Like, how do you say, yes, we're here for you and all that stuff, but also get your work done? Like, or yeah, here you can have some time off. You have to come back and get your work done. You know.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's not always easy. I still keep bringing back to if it's about outcome, right? If somebody's consistently not delivering what they need to deliver, then
Mm,
that's something to be addressed. If
wrong seat or
if
wrong
somebody
place.
takes 2 days off a week and everything gets done, then maybe we're just not giving them enough challenging work to do. But at the same time, I mean, it's really about what are the goals for your position? What are we looking to achieve, right? What are you contributing? And again, that's going to look different industry by industry, role by role. But the point being, like, are you making the contributions you need to make? And, or are we focusing on superficial things because that's the traditional, stereotypical view of what it looks like to be a professional in that role? And a lot of those things don't really make a difference. And then one of the other things that came out that is likely a lot more important to, say, Gen Z than previous generations is the interest in caring about the type of people they work with, like diversity in the
Mm,
workplace, for example,
right,
right?
right,
That it's not just about me and what I'm doing, but it's also looking around and saying, okay, who else is my organization hiring? Who's on my
right.
team? And why that's important for leadership to understand, right? In hiring, that you need to be aware of what the rest of your workforce, how they're going to respond to the decisions you're making in recruitment and hiring, and that you're not just more isolated and looking at everything through a tunnel and saying, okay, well, I
Hmm.
have this one position and I need to find one person for this position, but how does that fit into the overall culture and the dynamics of what we're doing here?
Yeah, right. It's interesting because there's a lot of complexity with all of that. I mean, overall, because you're not certain jobs and workplaces, you're not going to get an agreement that diversity is good, and that's the way it is with those people and so on. But then others, you'll get people that are really committed to it. And I believe, generally speaking, that the more diverse viewpoints and experiences and skills and talents that you can bring to a workplace, the better they're going to be. The overall, you can outperform the others, but it also can take more work and more time to resolve conflicts and misunderstandings and things like that too. Just depends on who's there, right? And who you bring in. Other workplaces that would say maybe are not as diverse in the short run, it's going to make sense. Let's hire people that are like us, right? And that doesn't have to be things like skin color or sexual orientation or other things like that, gender. It could be as simple as like, this dude doesn't like country music or whatever it is, like it, or this dude, like I gave some interesting talks to California firefighters organization, and they've got guys now that not only they're working in San Francisco making great money there, but because of cost of living, they have to commute a couple hours and live a couple hours away. So all of a sudden, can't hang out and have a beer with everybody after work, right? And that's impacting their community. So there's a lot of stressors that can go on that organizations are dealing with because of all of these factors.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's just things to pay attention to, right? You can't always address every single one of them all at the same time,
Yeah,
but it's things that may be important to the people in your workforce that were not always on your radar or wasn't
for
always what
sure.
you're looking at, and the need to just be intentional about certain things, right? Like, I've worked in remote startups, right, where there's a lot of benefits to it, but you could find talent from anywhere. It doesn't matter where
Hmm.
they are because it's all remote anyway. But there's also a thing where usually you're moving fast when you're making hiring decisions. You're adding a new role and saying, we got to get somebody. And you're usually working within your networks, right? Okay, who do we know? Who
Hmm.
do we reach
Hmm.
out to? Well, once you do that for long enough, you start to realize, like, there's some homogeneity here. And
Right.
because we're not getting a bunch of different applicants, we're going with people we already know. A lot of times that starts to look kind of the same, right? And
Right.
I think a lot of organizations have a version of that, the traditional network of
Right.
the people that we're drawing from and pulling from. And
Yeah.
they may or may not be totally competent, but you also could miss out on quite a bit, a new perspective, a new idea, a new dynamic. And then you also
Hmm.
may have some Gen Zs, for example, in your workplace who are just looking at that for its own sake and saying, I'm not so sure I want to be a part of a company that looks so homogenous, right?
Yeah. And that's,
Right.
I mean, just thinking about survival as an organization and let alone thriving, if Gen Z goes this direction and you're not, you're getting left out. And I mean, quite literally, there are companies I've talked to that are in danger of dying of old age because their average like employee is 55 to 60 years old. and they're just somehow it's not clicking that, oh, we needed to be more flexible or try something new. It's not that these young people are all wrong. It's that we're not adapting.
So
Yeah.
Ryan, as we're kind of getting toward the end here, we've I think brought out a lot of good ideas here about understanding some of the changes and challenges and shifts and how to kind of navigate those, but also want to make clear that this can really be a strength, right? And we're going to
Hmm.
have multiple generations doing a lot of things, and people with strengths, there's benefits to experience. And we're speaking to a lot of educators, particularly in the education profession. I mean, that makes a big difference when you have people who have been through it, who have done it, who have adapted and become masters at what they do, right? And the
Right.
mix and a multi-generational strategy that accounts for all the different generations can really be a strength. Do you have a few of your favorite ideas or the best ones that came up in the book when you're talking about the multi-generational strategy and really making it work for you and saying, look, we want to have a multi-generational organization here, right? Because then we can take advantage of all the different strengths and things.
Right.
And now we're not on our back foot anymore, just trying to kind of get a sense of, oh, everything seems new. But now we're saying, all right, we're making a plan here, and it's a collaborative way forward.
Yeah. Well, to me, the central thing is values. And if you haven't really looked at values in organizations and what they are, that could sound however it sounds, could sound stupid, could sound old, whatever. Point is, we all value different things and different generations value different things. One of the things you talked about there is experience, and older people value their experience. So the flip side is if the younger people don't value that, then you're not going to benefit from the wisdom and experience, right? If younger people value innovation, old people don't value that, we're not going to benefit from innovation. So the process of communicating about everybody's values as a group, like actually having a town hall, actually maybe you can have ways to facilitate it online, polls, surveys, etc. Get all that out and find out what really are the values of the people in your organization, and does that match the traditional values that you've stated? It probably doesn't, because we've had so much change. So you're going to have to somehow compromise, right? Like, I think all successful relationships require a compromise. You got to give up a little or open your mind or change. It has to happen on both sides, right? So that process of coming together and being able to agree on values is, to me, the solution to all of this.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, that's so critical. Values, agreeing on the values, communicating them, living them, being
Mm,
consistent in them. And that's something that crosses generations. And that's each individual has certain values that are really critical and important to them. And you're going to get kind of the best of all worlds when you have clarity on that, because you're going to get a variety of different people that care in that and want to stand for that. And really, when we talk about those go above and beyond type of things, who really want to invest their effort and energy into making that work because it's important to them. It's not just,
right.
well, this is important to the company, so I should do it. And that's what we need. And again, I'll tie it back to the education world, because that can really be an area of frequent shortcoming in any industry or type of, whether it's a nonprofit organization or an industry where there's like an implied mission, where it's generally understood to be mission work, that it's still important for each individual organization to really establish their values and what they stand for uniquely, and to demonstrate that clearly.
Right.
Because again, that overall mission and values around a certain profession or vocation is what draws people into it. But then they also need to know, like, why am I in this particular organization? Why am
Right.
I in this school? Or why do I work for this nonprofit, etc.? What are they standing for and what are they doing?
Right.
Otherwise, I could go to a different one that maybe is living it a little better.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I mean, having started in marketing, I always think about things that way. And one of the most important things you do when you market something or sell it is, like you said, what makes this one better than the other choices? And I know that's not everybody thinks that way because they haven't had it slammed into their head for 20 years. But that having a healthy sort of fear that we can lose people or we can lose our way if we don't like hold on to what is that unique mission and goal that we have as an organization.
Yeah, Brian, well, it's been great talking to you, and this
You
is
too.
such an important topic. Where should listeners check out more about your work? Is there anything else that you're working on now?
I'm doing a lot with AI right now, but a lot of that stuff you can find at keynotespeakerbrian.com. You can find me on Amazon as well. And just Google me. Other than sometimes Google thinks I'm a football player, but I'm not. There are some other Brian Carters out there, but I'm pretty easy to find because I've put out a lot of stuff online.
Yeah, listeners, please do check that out. You can find the book, The Retention Formula, on Amazon. And you can also learn more about Brian and his work at keynotespeakerbrian.com. Like we said, we'll put those links below. Also, you can find Brian on LinkedIn. So we'll link to all those things below so you can find all of that and check all of that out. Please do also subscribe to The Authority for more author interviews like this. And if you haven't yet, check out my new show, Sideline Sessions, for interviews with coaches from across the sporting landscape. If you're involved as a coach or a parent or any other kind of stakeholder in youth and amateur and scholastic sports, that's a great show for you. So check that out too. Brian Carter, thanks again for being on The Authority.
Thanks for having me, Ross.
This episode was edited by Gage Sanderson.